Born into a tumultuous dynasty, Queen Mary I, known to history as Bloody Mary, emerged from a lineage that shaped the course of English history. But to understand her reign, we must first explore her beginnings, her birth, her royal lineage, and the dramatic events that shaped her early years. On February 18, 1516, Mary Tudor was born at Greenwich Palace, a long-awaited heir to King Henry VIII and his first wife, Catherine of Aragon. The birth of Mary brought joy and relief to the Tudor court, though she was not the son and heir her father had hoped for. Yet, her royal lineage was impeccable, linking her to the powerful houses of England and Spain. Mary's father, Henry VIII, was the second Tudor monarch, celebrated for his strength, charisma, and ambition. Her mother, Catherine of Aragon, was a Spanish princess and daughter of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile, the Catholic monarchs who completed the Reconquista and funded Christopher Columbus's voyages. This made Mary a descendant of two of Europe's most influential royal houses. From the start, Mary was groomed for greatness. As a princess, she received a classical education typical of royal children of her time. Fluent in Latin, Spanish, and French, Mary displayed remarkable intelligence and poise, earning her the admiration of the Tudor court. But her early years were not without challenges. In the late 1520s, the stability of Mary's life began to unravel. Her father, Henry VIII, sought to annul his marriage to Catherine of Aragon, claiming it was invalid because she had been previously married to his brother Arthur. This legal and theological crisis, known as the King's Great Matter, would have devastating consequences for Mary. Catherine's refusal to accept the annulment placed Mary at the center of a dynastic struggle. When the Pope refused to grant Henry's request, the king broke away from the Roman Catholic Church, establishing the Church of England and declaring himself its supreme head. In 1533, Henry's marriage to Catherine was annulled, and he married Anne Boleyn. Mary's life experienced a dramatic change after the death of Henry VIII in 1547. His 9-year-old son, Edward VI, ascended the throne. A devout Protestant, Edward's reign marked a dramatic shift in England's religious landscape. His advisors, led by the Duke of Somerset and later the Duke of Northumberland, implemented sweeping reforms to further solidify Protestantism. Edward's government abolished Catholic rituals, replaced Latin Mass with English services, and ordered the destruction of religious imagery. For Mary, a staunch Catholic, these changes were an affront to her faith and her mother's legacy. Mary refused to comply with these reforms. She continued to hear Catholic Mass in private, defying Edward's orders. This defiance strained her relationship with her brother and placed her under increasing scrutiny. But Mary's resolve only grew stronger as she prepared for the day she might restore Catholicism to England. Edward's reign was short-lived. By 1553, the young king was gravely ill. Determined to preserve Protestantism, Edward devised a controversial plan to exclude Mary from the line of succession. He named his Protestant cousin, Lady Jane Grey, as his heir, bypassing both Mary and Elizabeth. Edward's device for the succession declared that Jane, married to Northumberland's son Guildford Dudley, would inherit the throne. This decision set the stage for a dramatic confrontation. On July 10, 1553, Lady Jane Grey was proclaimed queen. However, her reign was met with widespread opposition. Mary, with her strong claim to the throne and popular support, refused to accept this usurpation. Mary fled to East Anglia, where she raised an army of loyalists. Nobles, commoners, and even key members of the nobility rallied to her cause, viewing her as the legitimate heir to the Tudor throne. Within 9 days, Mary's forces marched on London, forcing Jane's supporters to abandon her. On July 19, 1553, Mary entered London in triumph. The people greeted her with cheers and celebrations, their enthusiasm signaling the end of Jane's brief reign. Lady Jane Grey was deposed and imprisoned in the Tower of London. Mary's victory was not just a personal triumph, it was a decisive moment in Tudor history. Against all odds, she had claimed her rightful place as queen, becoming England's first woman to rule in her own right. Mary's coronation on October 1, 1553, was a grand and historic event. Dressed in regal splendor, she was crowned at Westminster Abbey, surrounded by the symbols of her authority and legitimacy. The coronation marked the start of a reign that would be defined by her determination to restore Catholicism and her vision of a united England. The streets of London echoed with the sound of celebration. Mary's Ascension represented a victory for her faith and a restoration of the Tudor line, but the challenges ahead would test her resolve and define her legacy as one of history's most controversial monarchs. Upon ascending the throne, Mary I was determined to undo the religious changes instituted by her father, Henry VIII. The break from Rome, which had led to the establishment of the Church of England, was a thorn in her side. Mary, a devout Catholic, viewed her father's actions as a betrayal of the true faith. Her first major act was to restore England to the Catholic fold. This meant not only reversing the Protestant Reformation, but also re-establishing ties with the Pope and the Roman Catholic Church. The Pope, Paul IV, welcomed Mary's decision, and in 1554, the papal legate was sent to formally absolve England of heresy. With this move, Mary hoped to heal the rift in England's religious fabric. But while she gained the approval of the Catholic Church, the decision deepened divisions within her kingdom. One of the most controversial aspects of Mary's reign was her harsh treatment of Protestant dissenters. Desiring to rid England of heresy, she began what would become a brutal campaign to eliminate Protestantism from her kingdom. In 1554, Mary passed the Heresy Acts, reviving medieval laws that made it a capital offense to deny the doctrines of the Catholic Church. This marked the beginning of what would come to be known as the Marian persecutions. The executions began in early 1555. Protestants who refused to recant their faith were burned at the stake, a punishment meant not only to eliminate heresy, but to serve as a grim warning to others. One of the first to suffer this fate was John Rogers, a clergyman and translator of the Bible. Rogers' execution at Smithfield set the tone for what was to come. Over the next 3 years, approximately 280 men, women, and even children were burned alive for their Protestant beliefs. Among the most famous victims of the Marian persecutions were Nicholas Ridley and Hugh Latimer, 2 leading Protestant bishops. In October 1555, they were executed side by side at the stake in Oxford. Hugh Latimer made a peculiar statement before they were burned. His words were, "Be of good comfort, Master Ridley, and play the man. We shall this day light such a candle by God's grace in England, as I trust shall never be put out." Latimer's words would resonate through history, a testament to the courage and conviction of the Protestant martyrs. Perhaps the most significant victim was Thomas Cranmer, the architect of the English Reformation. After months of imprisonment and psychological torment, Cranmer recanted his Protestant beliefs in a moment of weakness, but when he was brought to the stake, he defiantly reaffirmed his faith, thrusting his right hand, the hand that had signed his recantation, into the flames first, declaring it unworthy. While the executions were meant to deter heresy, they often had the opposite effect. The spectacle of men and women dying for their beliefs inspired sympathy for the martyrs and outrage against Mary's regime. Over time, public opinion turned against her, and the nickname Bloody Mary began to take hold. In 1554, Mary got married to Philip II of Spain. Mary's marriage to Philip II was not a love match. It was a calculated political alliance, one that would tie England firmly to Catholic Spain. At the time, Spain was one of the most powerful nations in Europe, and Philip was its formidable king. Mary, having ascended to the throne as the first queen regnant of England, sought to strengthen her position by allying herself with Spain in a world where Catholicism was in retreat against the rising Protestant powers. Philip's role in England remained largely ceremonial. He spent little time in England, preferring to return to Spain, leaving Mary to rule the kingdom with limited interference from her husband. Despite this, his presence was ever present in the minds of many Englishmen who felt uneasy about the prospect of England being drawn too deeply into Spanish interests. This sparked widespread protests and unrest. One of the most significant uprisings was the Wyatt's Rebellion, a Protestant revolt that sought to overthrow Mary's rule. The rebellion was led by Sir Thomas Wyatt, a Kentish nobleman with strong Protestant sympathies. Wyatt had long been critical of the Spanish marriage, and as rumors of an impending Spanish invasion and the strengthening of Catholic influence spread, he rallied disillusioned Protestants and discontented Englishmen to his cause. Wyatt's initial aim was not just to oppose the marriage, but to overthrow Mary herself. Wyatt's forces gathered in Kent and were joined by a diverse group of rebels, including many from the gentry and merchant classes. Their march was swift, but their cause lacked both widespread support and military resources. Nonetheless, the rebellion posed a serious threat to Mary's reign, and it would test her ability to retain control over her kingdom. Wyatt's rebels advanced toward London, but their hopes of rallying more support from the city's populace soon began to crumble. While the rebellion initially gained traction, it quickly became apparent that the broader public was not as sympathetic as Wyatt had hoped. Loyalists to Mary began to fortify the capital, and the rebellion faltered as the rebels faced defections and internal divisions. As the rebellion approached London, Wyatt's forces clashed with Loyalist troops. Despite some early successes, the rebels were swiftly outnumbered. Mary, demonstrating both strength and cunning, took immediate action to secure the city and prevent the rebellion from gaining further momentum. Mary's response to the Wyatt rebellion was swift and decisive. While some of her advisors urged caution, Mary was resolute in her determination to quell the uprising. Her strength as a monarch was clear as she commanded the royal forces to confront the rebels head-on. She refused to retreat or allow the rebellion to undermine her reign. Her ability to act decisively in the face of rebellion cemented her position as a ruler who would not be easily overthrown. In the end, the rebellion was quickly suppressed, with Wyatt and many of his co-conspirators captured. Wyatt's rebellion was swiftly put down, but the consequences were severe. Wyatt himself was captured and put on trial for treason. His rebellion was seen as a direct threat to the crown, and Mary, unwilling to show mercy to those who sought to challenge her, had him executed. Many of his supporters were also executed or imprisoned. Despite the bloodshed, Mary's ability to suppress the rebellion without losing control of her throne demonstrated her strength as a monarch. The rebellion, however, was a bitter reminder of the political and religious divides within England. For the Protestants, the defeat of the rebellion did not mean the end of their discontent, and it would spark further resistance to Mary's Catholic policies. After years of public and political pressure, Mary became convinced that she was pregnant. She displayed all the signs of pregnancy: morning sickness, changes in her appearance, and a growing belly. The court was filled with hope that the royal couple would finally secure an heir for the throne. However, despite all her symptoms, Mary's pregnancies were false. Historians believe that Mary suffered from pseudocyesis, a psychological condition where a woman believes she is pregnant, experiencing the physical symptoms of pregnancy, but no child is growing within her. Each time, her hopes were dashed, and each time, the court, the nation, and her own heart were broken. The disappointment of her failed pregnancies not only caused her emotional pain, but also invited public ridicule. Mary's repeated pregnancies and subsequent losses were seen as failures by many, and her inability to provide an heir tarnished her image as a queen. The public's reaction to Mary's false pregnancies was not one of sympathy. Instead, it was met with gossip and scorn. As a woman whose primary role was to produce heirs, her inability to do so left her vulnerable to mockery and criticism. The court, too, became divided in its reactions. Some believed she was truly pregnant, while others suspected something more sinister. The lack of a royal heir turned Mary's reign into a tragic tale. By the late years of her reign, Mary's health had begun to seriously decline. Some historians believed that this deterioration was due to uterine or ovarian cancer, conditions that would have explained many of the symptoms she experienced, including abdominal pain, bloating, and weight loss. Her physical decline mirrored the emotional toll of her unfulfilled hopes for an heir and the immense pressure she faced. By late October of 1558, Mary's condition had worsened. She was bedridden, and the court began to fear the worst. Her doctors and attendants were uncertain as to what was causing her pain, but it was clear that her body was succumbing to the illness. Her medical condition remained a topic of speculation. Her body, worn by years of emotional and physical pain, was now on the brink of collapse. During her final days, Queen Mary was aware that her reign would come to an end soon. She expressed concerns about the future of her Catholic restoration, leaving her throne to her half-sister Elizabeth, a Protestant who would later go on to become one of England's most famous monarchs. But that's a story for another day. Throughout these final days, her husband, Philip II of Spain, was not by her side. He had been absent for much of her later years, focused on his own empire, which left Mary to face her last days alone. without the support of her once hopeful political marriage. On November 17, 1558, Queen Mary I passed away at the age of 42, surrounded by her ladies and trusted advisors. The cause of death is widely believed to have been complications from the cancer that had ravaged her body. Though she had been one of the most powerful women in Europe, her final moments were quiet, and the kingdom was left to grapple with what her death meant for the future of England. Mary's death marked the end of the tumultuous reign of a Catholic queen who had tried, but ultimately failed, to restore the Catholic faith to England. Her legacy would be forever tied to her religious persecution, which earned her the infamous nickname of Bloody Mary. But her death also marked the end of the Tudor family's hope for Catholic restoration. Mary I may be remembered as Bloody Mary, but her death was one of quiet despair. It was a death that reflected not only the physical decline of a queen, but also the end of an era of religious division in England.